Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Claire Walton. I'm an archaeologist and I'm based at Butser Ancient Farm, which is an archaeological open-air museum in the south of England. Now, the farm is famous for its research into Iron Age agriculture, but it's also really well known for the wide range of experimental constructions that we now have on site, which range from the Mesolithic right up to the Saxon period. Today I'd like to tell you about a recent project. It was an experiment. The experiment was to try to engineer a roof structure based on an archaeological case study. Now, the reason I want to talk about this project today is because I think it was a very interesting opportunity to examine whether experimental research in an open-air archaeological museum causes a conflict between the practical realities and the experimental ideal. In other words, is it a perfect storm? Is it a nightmare? Or is it a perfect partnership? Can these two things of practical and experimental be brought together, and can each complement the other? So hopefully at the end, we'll take a moment to consider whether I or we as a team believed that we were successful in our aim to bring them both together. Before we talk about the case study, we need to have a little look at some of the practical things that influenced what we decided to build. For around the last 5 years, we've had a large Neolithic building on our site. You can see on the map it's in the bottom corner, so it's quite a restricted space. Now, that building suffered some quite serious damage in a storm in late 2019, and we decided that for safety we needed to deconstruct the building. Of course, that's quite devastating at first, but then it presents an exciting opportunity to construct something new. From this point, we had to start thinking about what that new building might be. But of course, when we deconstructed this old one, we thought we might be able to salvage some of the materials and use them in the new building. So you can see this is us taking the old building apart. We actually were able to remove the daub from the wattle and keep that daub, that mud, and use it in the new building. Some of the timbers in the roof were at least 5 years old, but we've actually been able to reuse them inside the new building. There's lots of evidence for people having done the same in the past. There we go. The site is almost cleared, ready for a new building to begin construction. Lots of practical considerations. Here's just a few of them. So very briefly then, your budget's going to be really critical. You do need to be able to afford to at least roof your structure, because otherwise the building will start to decay instantly. Your budget will obviously pay for volunteers or manpower. It will also pay for your materials. You could try crowdfunding like we did to get some public donations, or you could apply for funding from bodies, in our case, like Council for British Archaeology Wessex. Now, when you think about materials, it might be your fantasy to build a house with an einkorn thatched roof, but that's going to prove really challenging to obtain. We selected water reed because we knew it was easy to source and we've used it before. It also lasts a very long time. Space and size are major considerations. Size in particular for us, there were some restrictions on a minimum size. We needed to be able to accommodate large school groups. There was also a maximum size imposed upon us by the local planning regulations. The building could be no more than 5.5 metres tall. Time is a major factor at Butser Ancient Farm because we're not funded by the government, so all of our income comes from ticket sales and school visits. It's not possible for buildings to be out of action for long periods of time. Our schools use them almost every single day of the year. That meant that we had to create a project for ourselves that had a short timescale. Originally, we'd hoped to build it in 4 months. I can laugh now because at the time I had no idea we would enter a global pandemic and that I'd find myself 1 year later still finishing the building. Lots of other considerations too, those are the main ones. So there is very little evidence of Neolithic houses in the UK, particularly in England. So finding good excavated evidence was a real challenge. But I also wanted something which was contemporary. I also wanted something which was geographically as close as possible to the site of Butser Ancient Farm. So we eventually chose this site. It's called Horton and it's near Heathrow. It was excavated only 8 years ago by Wessex Archaeology, one of the UK's largest commercial archaeology units. They discovered 4, possibly 5 houses at what was a sand and gravel quarry. Now the archaeological footprint's really clear, so we're as confident as we can be that we're not missing any significant structural elements. What we have to work with is really quite surprising. This is a big building. It's 15 metres by 7 metres, but there's only 6 clear post holes. There were traces of what are called slot or foundation trenches around the perimeter of the building, and the analysis suggests that the timber in these trenches was oak. It's important to point out that this building is not a rectangular shape. It's wider in the middle and narrower at the ends. This ultimately influenced the design that we chose for the building. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the design that Wessex Archaeology created before we even approached them to talk about working collaboratively. You can see it's a plank-walled structure which has a very shallow pitched thatched roof. Now, one of the main things we know at Butser Ancient Farm is that the pitch of the roof is very important. If it's too shallow, the rain will not run off the roof and the material will rot very quickly. So in a way, the pitch of the roof is actually what steered our project to the second and third designs that you see illustrated here, those computer generations. In order to make the pitch steep enough, but keep the building within that 5.5 metre limit, we had to really reduce the height of any wall. You can see in the left-hand picture, we tried to incorporate a low wall. But because of keeping the pitch the same throughout the structure of the building, but accommodating for that bulge in the middle, it was an awkward design. We then moved on to our third and final design concept, which was actually creating an earth-fast building and removing the wall element altogether. We still have timbers going into the ground, but they're actually also the same timbers that are supporting the roof. So we've talked a lot about the design. Now I thought it would be a nice chance to take a look at some photographs from our project and have something of a mindful moment. So I hope you enjoy looking at these. back to earth with a bump, we should probably mention health and safety. In the 21st century, this is so critical. In the 1970s, the first director of the farm used to boast about being able to walk up one side of a house and down the other side to demonstrate the strength of the roof. But this isn't something we recommend these days. All of our staff are trained in basic health and safety and to think carefully about whether what they are doing is safe or not. But very importantly, on our site, because we have so many school children and members of the public visiting, we need to think very carefully about whether our construction project is safe for the public to be near. We discovered that there are really huge benefits to our project from collaborating with another organisation. Wessex Archaeology basically helped by publicising our project to their huge number of followers on social media. They also attended and presented at conferences, they gave public lectures, they joined us at events at the farm over the summer, and they contributed to our article published in British Archaeology magazine in July this year. They even made a scale model of the design, which I think was the star attraction at the current archaeology conference this year. Don't know what it is about adults and models, but everybody was so attracted to that model and wanted to talk about it. There is a little tiny figure in the doorway. It's complete coincidence, but we discovered that Playmobil are the perfect size to populate our Neolithic house. So it would be wonderful to have a whole Playmobil family living in there. So, with all the practical considerations, do I feel we compromised our experiment in any way? The answer is yes. The planning restrictions dictated maximum height and had some influence on the design that we ultimately chose. If there had been no restrictions, we could have constructed a building with a roof resting on a vertical wall. It could have been taller. We might also have used more experimental roofing materials, but ultimately, a larger building with a different design would have created a whole new set of stresses on budgets, timescales and materials. What I do think is really important is that we believe we found a really good resolution to the conflict between experiment and practice, at least in the context of full-scale buildings. And in doing so, I think that I would describe the two things as close to having a perfect relationship. I think that they can work really well together. In addition to the design that we select to build, we've also decided that from now on it's very important that we illustrate a number of other possible interpretations alongside the building we've constructed. We're actually currently in collaboration with students at the University of Southampton here in the UK to create interpretation panels for our site to present this concept to our visitors. We not only think that they will be fascinated and surprised to realise that we don't always know and that what we build in 3 dimensions is just a possibility, but I think it's really important that we highlight that experimental archaeology can only ever represent what might have happened and is never really the definitive answer. So, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this lecture. I hope that some of the information I gave you either entertained you or might have been informative. And finally, I'd like to say that I really do hope that we will get to see some of you in the next year or two coming to Butts Ancient Farm to visit us. You would be very welcome. Thank you very much.